Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Bangor. I am Reverend Andrew Moeller, and it is a pleasure to have you all joining us this morning, both here in the sanctuary and for those of you who are joining us on Zoom. Welcome. Before we get started, we do have some announcements that Lori will bring, but I just want to remind people, if you're joining us today for the first time or maybe the second or third time, we hope that you'll join us after the service for a little coffee and refreshment and give us a chance to get to know us and we you. So, Lori.
Thank you. Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Can't hear me? Oh, now we can. Okay, I'm doing the announcements from down here so I don't have to run up and down. Oh, so today, this afternoon at 3 o'clock, if any of you were not aware of this, FLIA is putting on a multi-faith MLK service right here in the sanctuary. Reverend Drew's been working hard to get 2 services together for today. And there's going to be also on Zoom, I believe that link is in the e-news, so if anybody needs that. So our monthly chat with Reverend Drew will happen immediately following the service today. So right here in the sanctuary, you can just stick around, have a conversation. If you're new, you can find out, ask your questions about Unitarian Universalism. So we welcome everyone to participate. Then tomorrow morning, the Martin Luther King breakfast is happening at UMaine in Wells Common. That's a tradition that happens every year. We always have a table. Are there seats still left at our table? There's a couple of seats still left at the table. See Suzanne. If you would like a seat for tomorrow morning, I believe the tickets are $20. It's always a fabulous thing. And Women with Wings is going to be singing. And now the books. The books for the UU Common Read, they are actually here. So if any of you ordered a book and are going to participate in the book group that goes along with it, please see me after the service. See me. And so if you have a little, the e-news, or if you have a flyer from outside that'll give you a list of all the other things that are happening, but please note, social justice is not meeting today. Coming of age is not meeting today. And this month's Super Sunday has been canceled. So hopefully we'll move forward with a Super Sunday next month. So that is it.
Thank you, Lori, for all those announcements. Boy, we are a busy bunch. It's good. It's good to stay active in the wintertime. So let us just take a moment to pause as we get ready to enter into our time of worship today, as we remember the legacy of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and all the ways that he has captured our imagination of what we can do to make the world a better place for all people, and suggesting a process of how that can be done through nonviolent resistance, through showing radical love to our neighbor and to ourselves. So, as we enter into our time of worship, let us open our hearts to the choir's introit.
Resilience, we are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on. Resilience, make a new plan, stand up again and say yes we can. Resilience, we are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on. Resilience, make a new plan, stand up again and say yes we can. Resilience, we are strong, shoulder to shoulder, keep moving on. Resilience, make a new plan, stand up again
Good morning again. Whoop. All right. Multitasking this morning. So our chalice lighter this morning is Connie McVeigh. And the chalice lighting is The Essential Work of Justice and Liberation for All by Rosemary Bray McNatt. By no means are we, Unitarian Universalists, perfect. We often fail as much as we succeed. Yet even when we have broken our vows 1,000 times, we return to this essential work of justice and liberation for all. We do the work best when we remember what church is and what it is not. Church is not a place to hide. It is not the place to get away from the world. It is not a place where we get to pretend that the lives we live and our particular situations are not terribly complex, often confusing, and sometimes depressing. Church is the place where we stand with one another, look the world in the eye, attempt to see clearly, and gather strength to face what we see with courage and, yes, with joy. So this morning, as we light our chalice flame, let us do so with strength, courage, and the joy of learning and growing together. Blessed be. And now, as we love to sing, our opening hymn is number 348, Guide My Feet.
I'd now like to invite our young people of any age to come down for our message for all ages. All right, we got a good crowd today. So, once upon a time, there was a young daughter who complained to her father how miserable things were. She didn't know how she was going to be able to make it through her day. Things were really, really frustrating. She was tired of struggling and fighting all the time. It seemed that once she solved one problem, another problem emerged. Her father, who was a chef, took her into the kitchen. And he filled 3 pots. I don't have a third pot here. You have to imagine I have a third pot here. And she filled these pots with water and placed them on the stove to boil. When they had been boiling for about a minute or two, the father put in one pot a potato, nice, hard, firm potato, and the other pot placed an egg with a very fragile shell. And then, in the third pot, placed coffee beans. He then let those potatoes, the egg, and the coffee simmer for about 20 minutes. The daughter kind of moaned because she knew her father was going to try and teach her some sort of a lesson. Wondering, she just sat there kind of wondering what he was doing. But after 20 minutes, he turned the burners off and took the potatoes out of the pot and placed them into a bowl. So we've got our potato, and then took the egg out and placed that out. I don't know if that's going to not roll around too much. Living dangerously here, right? And then he took a ladle and took a scoop out of the coffee pot and poured it into a mug. He turned to her and he asked, "What do you see?" Potato, an egg, and coffee. Duh, right? Okay. Father said, "Well, wait a minute. Look a little closer." So, what's the potato like? Can you squeeze that potato? Is that hard, like the uncooked potato? It's soft. Yeah, it's got all soft. And then what happened to the egg? Is it fragile?
It's hot.
It's hot?
It's soft. Like, not soft. It's actually smooth.
It's smooth, yeah, but let's check this out. It's not so fragile anymore. Look at this. Because it's a hard-boiled egg, right?
I eat hard-boiled eggs.
You eat them? Great. I had one for breakfast. They're good. Yeah. If you wanted to have that for a snack, you're welcome to take it.
No. No, that's hers.
And then finally, her father said, "Take the coffee. Take this cup of coffee and take a sip of it." And she was surprised at how warm and it had this wonderful, rich flavor to it. And she was pretty amazed. So the potato went from strong,
That's her egg.
right, from when it was faced with the boiling hot water, right? The egg, when it was, the potato, when it was faced with the boiling hot water, which is kind of like what we deal with sometimes in life, adversity, difficult things happen to us. So this got boiled and boiled and boiled, and it softened. The egg, when it faced adversity and was boiled and boiled and boiled, it got hard. And what happened to the coffee? It got smooth. Yeah, it got smooth, and actually the beans and the water combined with each other. They worked together to make a delicious drink.
Trust me, I love coffee.
There you go.
That's what my ADHD is.
So the father said, "Which one are you?
Coffee.
When you face adversity, when things get difficult, when things get challenging in our lives, do you get soft and mushy?"
No, I get
Do you get hard like an egg? Okay.
I get smooth and hot.
Or do you mingle and mix with that frustration and create something new, some new possibility?
I'm with the egg
And so,
and the coffee.
yeah. And so the reason I wanted to tell this story today is because we are celebrating. Oh, yep. Can we sit down a little bit here so other people can see? Yeah. There's so much to play with here. I know. It's fun. So today we're talking about, who is this person? Anybody know?
Martin Luther King Jr.
And that what you were going to say too? Martin Luther King Jr., right? And one of the reasons that we remember him is that in his lifetime, he took on a lot of struggle and adversity. A lot of struggle and adversity. People were saying all kinds of bad things. They were actually physically attacking him, threatening his life. And instead of letting himself get all mushy or getting all hard and ignoring those people or getting totally mad and frustrated with them, he was kind of like the coffee beans that kind of simmered, and he combined with the things that were going on at the time, along with the value of nonviolent resistance, and worked to make and bring about change. He created something new, a new movement, the civil rights movement, that helped guarantee people got rights that they deserved in our country, because we believe that everybody deserves rights. So, this for today, we're going to sing you down to your special Martin Luther King Jr. chapel, where you're going to learn more about King and some of the ways that he worked to transform some of the dynamics of his time, some of the things that were going on, some of the challenges of his time, to try to bring about social change and make the world a better place for all people. So, with that, let us sing you down, and you can take that if you want. Dear friends, please join me in the spirit of meditation and prayer. Great universal spirit, interconnected web of which we are a part, we come together as a beloved community to hear the details of each other's lives and the things that bring meaning to our lives, the joys, the sorrows, the milestones, and the challenges that come along the way. Today we hold those in our hearts who are reaching the end of their lifespan. We pray that they are surrounded by love and have a peaceful transition that happens in their own time when they are ready. We hold those in our community who are infirm, who are sick, in particular Judy Boothbay, who is in the Northern Light, recuperating from another fall and perhaps another mini stroke. We hold in our hearts the joys of birthdays, of getting to teach first graduate or undergraduate students as a graduate student. And we also hold our loved ones, dear loved ones, people like Sue's mom, who engaged in the transformative power of love by doing something that was very difficult for her that has made a difference in Sue's life and Sue's outlook in the world. To me, there is nothing more powerful of a transformation than being able to do that kind of work, even when it pulls at our heartstrings. Spirit, we gather in this time and place because we know that each life tells an important story, that each life, like Jim Varner's, who has met Martin Luther King and marched with King and marched at his funeral and done so much work in our community for social justice rights. We know that each life holds a deep and abiding truth. By coming together in this community and sharing our joys and sorrows with each other, we grow closer to each other and we grow closer to becoming one. Blessed be. Amen.
Now is the time in our service when we opened our pockets and our wallets with generosity as we passed the plates for the offering this morning. And half of the collection shared today of the undesignated funds will go to the Hungarian Unitarian Church and Providence. It's a charity organization to serve the needs of Ukrainian refugees fleeing across the border to Romania, as well as internally displaced people in the Ukraine. So thank you in advance for your generosity.
We give thanks for the contributions to support this beloved community and the work of the Hungarian Relief Fund. Thank you. Blessed be.
Our reading this morning is called Why Martin Luther King Jr. Was Not a Unitarian Universalist. It's again by Rosemary Bray McNatt. And this is an excerpt from the article that appeared in the November-December 2002 edition of UU World. Several years ago, in the middle of my seminary education, my literary agent called with an intriguing proposition. Would I be willing to be considered as co-writer of Coretta Scott King's autobiography? I was one of several people being considered, but the book's prospective editor was said to be partial to me. I was more than willing to talk about it, and a meeting with King was arranged at the editor's office. I didn't make the cut, but that's not why I tell this story. During an hour of wide-ranging conversation, I mentioned to her that I was in seminary to become a Unitarian Universalist minister. What frankly surprised me was the look she gave me, one of respect and delight. Oh, I went to Unitarian churches for years, even before I met Martin, she told me, explaining that she had been, since college, a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which was popular among Unitarians and Universalists. And Martin and I went to Unitarian churches when we were in Boston. What surprised and saddened me most was what she said next. Though I am paraphrasing, the gist of it was this. We gave a lot of thought to becoming Unitarian at one time, but Martin and I realized we could never build a mass movement of Black people if we were Unitarian. In the end, King chose to forego the liberal religious enterprise among Unitarian Universalists and leaned instead on the God who promised never to leave or forsake him, even in death. It was a statement that pierced my heart and troubled my mind, then and now. I considered what our religious movement would be like if the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had chosen differently and had cast his lot with our faith instead of turning to his roots as an African American Christian. Certainly no one with King's gifts would have lived in complete obscurity, I realized. However, that our liberal religious movement would have neutralized the greatest American theologian of the 20th century. Certainly, his race would have been the primary barrier in a religious movement engaged until the 1970s in the active discouragement of people of color who wished to join its ministerial ranks. King might have found his personal struggles to serve Unitarian Universalism at least as daunting as the Montgomery bus boycott. Even if race had disappeared as an issue, King might have found the barrier of theology insurmountable. Though from the very start of his theological training he revealed a decided bent towards liberal religion, by the time his faith had been tried by the civil rights movement, King had said no to the sunny optimism of liberal faith, an optimism frankly untested in the heat of the battle for liberty and dignity for African Americans. In his famous essay, Pilgrimage to Nonviolence, published in the Christian Centuries series, Now My Mind Has Changed, in 1960, King made some trenchant comments about liberal theology that bear discussion. There is one phase of liberalism that I hope to cherish always, its devotion to the search for truth. its refusal to abandon the best light of reason. It was the liberal doctrine of man that I began to question. The more I observed the tragedies of history and man's shameful inclination to choose the low road, the more I came to see the depths and strengths of sin. I came to feel that liberalism had been all too sentimental concerning human nature, and that it leaned towards a false idealism. I also came to see that liberalism's superficial optimism concerning human nature caused it to overlook the fact that reason is darkened by sin. Liberalism failed to see that reason by itself is little more than an instrument to justify man's defensive ways of thinking. Reason, devoid of purifying power of faith, can never free itself from distortions and rationalizations.
Hi, everybody. I am going to sing a song that I first heard on a CD by 3 Mo tenors. And I'm just going to be one Mo today. This is a great song, Make Them Hear You. It is from the Broadway play Ragtime. And in context, it's sung by a black man. And so I changed some pronouns, and I found that actually now that I've changed the pronouns, I'm no longer singing to an anonymous audience, but I am, in fact, singing about Martin Luther King. It's just magic the way it worked out. It was just by changing pronouns. So, Jack. Tell the story, let it echo far and wide. Make them hear you, make them hear you. And justice was his battle, and how justice was denied. Make them hear you, make them hear you. And say to those who blamed him for the way he chose to fight, that sometimes there are battles that are more than black or white. And he could not put down his sword when justice was his right. Make them hear you, hear you. Go out and tell the story to your daughters and your sons. Make them hear you, make them hear you. And tell them in the struggle they are not the only ones. Make them hear you, make them hear you. His sword could be a sermon or the power of his pen. Teach every child to raise her voice, and then, my sisters, then will justice be demanded by all women and all men. Make them hear you. When they hear you, he'll be near you. Oh, Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, Pat, you've still got some chops on you. That was beautiful. We heard you loud and clear. Oh. The story told by Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt in our reading. Am I on? Can people hear me? Okay. Was both the reading that she offered was both exciting and challenging to hear. What would it have been like if the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had decided to become a Unitarian Universalist those many years ago? What would King have thought of all the controversy within our Unitarian Universalist Association, from the Black Power controversy in the late 60s to the significant restructuring that the UUA has been taking place over the last several years? I want to think that the life-affirming, life-saving message of Unitarian Universalism worldwide and in our city would attract more Black, Indigenous, and people of color to our denomination. Oh, there is change happening, but it is happening very slowly. The change that is happening at the greatest level is at the highest levels of our association, which is good, but we still have a long way to go regarding welcoming and accepting and engaging more Black, Indigenous, and people of color, both in our ministerial profession and in the pews. The last number that I heard was that ministers of color in our denomination last less than 3 years in any given settled ministry, which is a little bit less than half of their white counterparts. And bi, transgender, and gender fluid ministers, both white and of color, average only about 2 years as settled ministers. It seems like we have a long way to go, even though we have made some significant strides in the right direction with the formation of groups like Allies for Racial Equality, which is an ally group that is focused on disrupting oppression and uprooting white supremacy in our denomination, and the creation of Black Lives UU, or BLUE, an organization of Black people in our denomination working to expand their power and capacity of color for people in our denomination. While we are still progressing, we still have a long way to go to get our denomination to the promised land of racial equality. Looking at how our societal norms and around race and gender identity continue to creep into our sacred space, the ongoing challenge is to work on this adversity and to continue to struggle with it, both at our denominational level and in our congregations and in our own hearts. I remember 2 years ago, I led a year-long program on dismantling white supremacy. Many of you were in that program. It was hard work. I chose a book titled Me and White Supremacy by British author and reformer Layla Said. The primary purpose of this non-apologetic book was that everyone, especially white people, act in white supremacist ways. Even those of us who are more aware are not fully woke to the many ways that white colonist mindset still lives in our hearts and our minds today. I remember getting a lot of pushback on the choice of that book. I heard people say, "What does a British woman of color seem to know about racism in our country?" A couple of people didn't like the book because it assumed right off the bat that everybody who was reading it was a white supremacist or had white supremacist tendencies, because we're the good ones, right? This is, I think, the false idealism that King was trying to address in his quote from our reading earlier. As the group progressed, once we reached about the third month of the program, I noticed that the resistance lessened, and all of a sudden we started getting into some really powerful conversations. Awareness arose. The group shifted from being potatoes and eggs into steeping into the grounds of adversity and expanding of awareness. We are the good ones, but only if we continue to engage in the work of anti-racism, anti-oppression work at the deepest levels of our soul and spiritual lives. It is hard work. It requires us to confront some of our reasoning, to challenge some of our assumptions, and to be with and sit in uncomfortable places as we hear stories of racism that is still rampant in our society today. Just as an aside, I just heard an NPR report about a bank out in California that just got convicted of redlining. It's still happening today. Whenever I talk about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I always am sure to start by emphasizing the Reverend part, because I think that his being a person of faith allowed him to fully engage in the work of deep soul-searching and self-reflection through his preferred spiritual practice of prayer. Doing this work requires us to develop some skills that ground ourselves and help us sit in the heat of adversity, questioning our reasoning, and opening ourselves to finding new truths and exposing false ones. I believe that if King had not been a spiritual or religious person who embraced the notion of a loving, kind, and compassionate spirit or God, he would not have made it as far as he did. We know that there are times when he almost didn't make it. In the last year of his life, many of his longtime friends and colleagues disowned him because they thought he was going too far by launching into the Poor People's Campaign and calling out the U.S. military-industrial complex and our addiction to war. He also called out an economic system that rewarded the few at the expense of many. In the last year of his life, he suffered from crippling bouts of depression. He started drinking a lot and had an extramarital affair. The pressure was tremendous, but he continued engaging and being in that adversity and finding new ways to move forward. I know that as a minister, I sometimes find it frustrating because I often get tied up in the everyday things that are going on in the congregation to a point where I don't have as much time to engage and read and learn more about anti-oppression work that is going on around the world and all the new ways that we are starting to become woke to dismantling racial prejudice and working for equality. Still, I push myself to try and make sure that I keep up with some reading on the subject. I subscribe to the New York Times race-related column and stories on race. Sometimes I have to remind myself that they should be aspects of our daily life, that we need to do this on a daily basis to continue moving forward. There's still more to be done. I think it's white people who need to continue to look for opportunities to engage in this vital work. We are so used to approaching this issue from an educational and an intellectual perspective that we need to work on engaging engaging in it at a psycho-spiritual level, where most of the habits that we have and proclivities to a particular way of responding to the world are often formed and reinforced. Suppose you were looking for a way to get more involved in this winter and springtime and learning more about anti-racism, anti-oppression work. I recommend that you sign up for the book group that Lori is organizing on the book Mistakes and Miracles, Congregations on the Road to Multiculturalism. I have not yet read it because the book's just arrived today, but I will be reading that on my sabbatical. But I hope that you're able to be part of that conversation that Lori is reading, because I also think not only reading and learning these things on our own is important, it's great to do it in community because we learn from each other. We learn from each other and realize that we're not alone in our struggle, right? It's not easy. I also encourage you to go online and read up on the proposed bylaw changes to our UUA bylaws, especially Article 2, that is the part that engages our principles that are being revised. We'll be voting on revising them this year at General Assembly. And I dearly hope that we find delegates to go to General Assembly this year so that we can have our voice heard as we make these very important decisions to our faith. Today, as we gather and honor the legacy of the great teacher, prophet, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think perhaps the most important thing that he reminds us of is that the process of decolonizing and working for racial equality in our community and economic opportunity for all people is something that is a process. It's not a goal where we can just get to a certain milestone and say we're done. It's something that continues to evolve. I think, Sue, you sharing from one generation to another, what a difference that makes, and it takes time. But we need to continue to find ways to engage that work. So, if you ask me, I kind of like to leave you with a little bit of something to work on at the end of my sermons. And so I have asked the choir to give us the clear and straight message of what I want you to take home with you today.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest until we are done. So I'm going to invite you now to rise in body and in spirit and to move with the music however it hits you, to sing our closing song, Ella's song.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. To the killing of black men, black mothers' sons, is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers'
As we extinguish our Unitarian Universalist chalice flame, symbol of faith, hope, love, and connection, and our calling to work for freedom without resting, let us be reminded that although our time of worship has come to an end, our service to each other and the rest of the world has just begun. I now invite you to join in singing our benediction.